Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to call to order this committee of the whole for January 24th in honor of the Liwat, the Village of Pemberton acknowledges that we're meeting within the unceded territory of the Liwat Nation. Today in person, we have myself, Councillor Craddock, Councillor Nightingale, and Councillor Ramsden. For those members of the public in attendance, please note that this meeting is a live webinar and being recorded. A recording of the meeting will be available on the village's website following the meeting. I will just quickly get an approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Craddock, seconded by Councillor Ramsden. Opposed, motion carries. And we'll just get the adoption of minutes from Committee of the Whole 235 from December 13th. Moved by Councillor Nightingale, seconded by Councillor Craddock. Any opposed, motion carries. Being all that, and I will turn the floor over to our guests. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a long time, it seems. So tell us about what you're doing.
Yeah,
This is just an informal. We just again wanted to reopen relationship. We haven't seen you for Ben and new council, and just it's an update from your work and anything you want to know about our work. So.
definitely. Well, hopefully we can be pretty informal, but thank you, Your Worship, for the introduction here, and great to see some councillors from before and some new. So congratulations, and looking forward to working with you. And I thought this meeting could be just a good opportunity for us to talk about some of the priorities for the village here, and what I can do as your federal representative to help achieve that. And so obviously it was great to be here back in, I guess it was November, a really important announcement on electric vehicle charging. And I think that's one opportunity that we have. I got your package of materials that I know has been sent out, and things that were approved just last week. So I've got some light reading to do very soon. But for me, it's for my own work here, it's in between time in two sessions. We had a very busy session in the fall. We're going to start again on Monday. And one of the things that we're looking at right now is what's going to be in the budget this year. So it is a really good time for me to better understand what some of the priorities are for Pemberton, and to see how that can factor into the federal budget this year. And then for the government programs that are already there, to make sure those are meeting the needs of Pemberton, and if not, how that might be able to be modified going forward. So yeah, and so I know one of the big topics I'm sure we'll discuss is on housing. I know that the cost of real estate has gone up considerably over the last couple of years, and there's a big interest in building affordable housing, and we can talk about that in a little bit. And Mayor Richmond and I have over the last few years during COVID had fairly regular meetings to talk about some of the other priorities, and I know top of the list is talking about regional transportation. So I'm sure that'll that we discuss as well. But just kind of a bit of information on my formal role in Parliament. So of course I'm the member of Parliament for this area, but I also sit on the Environment and Sustainable Development Committee, as well as the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee. So if we want to talk about matters related to climate change and conservation or reconciliation, very happy to get into that. And I know there's an incredibly close relationship with the Liwat Nation, on whose traditional territory we're meeting on right now. So those are, maybe that's the high level stuff. In terms of programs, we can get into some of the National Housing Strategy programs. We have programs related to building purpose-built affordable rental, which is called the Rental Construction Finance Initiative. So that's been open, and it'll stay open for a while. And we also have so that program allows developers to access the federal government's rate of borrowing. So being able to build at rock bottom rates and getting mortgages for 50 years. So that's very attractive for building new projects. There's also the National Co-Investment Fund, where the federal government will contribute to an affordable housing project if another order of government contributes as well. So some areas that's meant the municipality contributing some land, or BC Housing getting involved. And there's a good example of that in Squamish at the Westwinds Senior Center, where now 300 seniors are living in affordable rentals there. And the other one that's open right now is on supportive housing, which is called the Rapid Housing Initiative. And so the structure of this program is it's a federal fund where municipalities, other orders of government, Indigenous groups, or nonprofits can apply to it, and you need to build it within 1 year, and it's supportive housing. So things like women fleeing domestic violence, or other programs like that, and that's open for applications right now. So those are some of the big housing projects. On infrastructure, we have an agreement with the province here called or for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. That program's been in effect now for 4 years. We're getting to the last year in our bilateral agreement, and then we're going to be renewing that going forward. So this invests in everything, and some projects actually in Pemberton as well, including the multimodal transport one, as well as the soccer fields, which I think are now open, and I know it's a huge asset to the community. And I know programs like this are so critical for small communities like Pemberton to be able to get big infrastructure projects done. So I'd be very interested to hear what some of the top line priorities are in this space, and what I can do as your representative to help advocate for that. So maybe I'll just end it there, or stop that there, and then we can just get into a bit of an open discussion, and I'll leave it to you, Mayor Richmond, to lead us from here.
The Squamish project, how did that funding break down? Who, did they come with land, the feds provided X, the province provider? How do you know how that worked?
Yeah, so it's a fairly complicated proposal or project. So the district provided the land. The developer that got involved in the project is Polygon, and it was one of the first ones where the CMHC was working with BC Housing, so that ironed out a lot of the kinks in that first project. And so the federal government committed about $41 million to it. BC Housing, I forget how much they committed, but they were involved in it as well. And then who's the operator going forward of the project?
Is it Sea Sky?
No, the seniors.
Seniors.
The Squamish Senior Society.
Squamish Senior Society is operating it. And so that was the system that was put into place. It took a very patient developer, because it took about 2.5 years for this project to come, or for the money to actually flow from the federal and provincial government. But that learning experience has greatly eased the process going forward, because now all those relationships are in place with CMHC and BC Housing. And it's a model that might be able to be replicated here too.
Well, the Lions have another property, so it would be like the next phase of what we call the Lions Villa for seniors housing. And there is a property available. It's got a couple of challenges to it, but there is a property that belongs to them for that use. And I know they're keen to start working towards the next phase again. It's kind of up and down on the over the last couple of years, or the last 5 years, but I know they really want to get working, recognizing that it'll take some time to get to the finish line, but it sounds like that could be a model that would work for them, the Lions. And the supportive housing one, is that 100% funding, or is that
100% funding? Yeah.
All right. Cool. Don't just please put your hands up, join in the conversation here as you will here.
Under the supportive housing, can that be a mixed use type of building, or does it have to be a standalone building just for supportive housing? And I'm throwing that out for the fact that if the village was to build a new municipal hall and put 2 or 3 stories above it, could a person get funding under that for those levels other than the community part?
It'd be possible, I think. I'd have to look into that a little bit more. I haven't seen a project like that that's been put together. Part of the challenge of it is that if you get approved for funding, it does have to be built within 1 year. So it's a pretty short turnaround time. But I'd have to look into the eligibility. Typically what they look like are smaller homes, or sometimes you're converting a building from one use into supportive housing, or it's sometimes been modular homes that are being built or built elsewhere.
And that's what the first phase of the Alliance was the modular homes that the federal government funded in the provincial years ago.
Okay, when was the Lions project built?
2008, I think it started.
The first 8 units were in the
maybe 1980s, then 2007, so 2005, 2006. So in that, BC Housing made a big announcement to put a whole lot of units, and they basically looked at wherever they had land, BC Housing owned land, and selected Pemberton as one of the locations. I think Squamish got theirs at the same time, a number of units at the same time.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd be happy to look into that a little bit more, but
I'm always looking for a way that we can create housing for people on land that we own. But this is the only land that we own, and we're looking for new buildings, so I'm just trying to find a way to get 2 or 3 things out of one piece of land.
yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense.
Thanks.
I'm just curious why there's the rigidity with the timeline, because I really appreciate what you're saying, Ted, and kind of being creative and thinking out of the box. Because we don't own a lot of land, but if we have, say, a year to do something, it's tricky, right? And we're a small town with not a huge bank account. And so I'm just wondering why that rigidity is there in terms of timelines.
Yeah, so it's really meant for shovel-ready projects that can be built right away. And so I mentioned a few other programs that are potentially require more design and lead-in time. So typically they're meant for things that are modular homes or conversions of buildings. And the whole idea is that we have a housing crisis right now, and we want to make sure that we're supporting people that are in the most need as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
And so that's why it's structured that way. But the other programs have a longer time horizon.
When we were just talking about another area of interest for us is our flood protection work. And there's a number of projects that we've identified, and some of them are mid-sized tickets. I know the federal disaster mitigation fund, is that the extreme
Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund.
adaptation? That's gonna be new, right?
Yeah, so it got funded in the budget last year. And we had, I think it was 1.5 billion that was added to it then. And then about 3 months ago, we launched Canada's National Adaptation Strategy, and we added another $500 million to it. And so I think collectively there's about $2 billion that's available in that fund. And it could be for projects like I'd love to hear about actually.
We will. So, but yeah, no, that's great. And is there any intake limitations to that we need to know about? Is that like, you gotta have your application in tomorrow, or how does that?
Well, actually the intake just launched, I think a week ago today. So that's available and open for applications. I forget when the deadline for applications is. I think it's the end of February. So definitely something to look into right away. But I know that Pemberton is probably subject to more or at risk of more natural disasters than just about anywhere else in the country.
Did they give you a helmet in your water wings on the way? Well, that's great to hear. I mean, we're working here locally. We were just talking about it earlier. We got a number of plans and ideas in terms of raising our level of protection. And we're working with provincial representatives, see where they get support, but there's definitely some funding required for us, a bigger ticket item. I think that fund, it's like a minimum $10 million projects, I think. Is that what, do I have that right?
Yeah, well, so there's two different ones. There's the smaller projects, which I think is under 5 million. And then there's the other ones are over 10 million. So they created I think it was actually out of the 2021 budget. We created a smaller one for especially smaller communities that wouldn't be able to access it otherwise. But we do have the two streams of it.
Gotcha. So yeah, I would anticipate that we'll be looking at that months to come. So
Next
maybe
meeting.
But if I could, I'd be curious about some of the projects that you have identified in mind.
well, we have there's a few of the list of priorities, and then there's still some sorting out to do. So I don't want to speak for our collective group, but we're looking at we got the pump station on the Iron Canal is our top priorities. Still trying to put some high level numbers to that, but the pump station on the Arn would be a really significant protection for us. And then we're looking at a setback dike that requires purchase of property. And obviously the construction of the dike, you know, so some of the good news is that, well, one of the, to me, it shows that it's made to happen. The property is actually for sale, but which is great. But also, you know, there's a lot of material that has been proven that we could put on the river to work on site on the project, build the offset dike. So that's a bigger one. That would be like one of the single biggest projects that for protection that we can do around here. It's been identified through Northwest Hydraulics studies that we've done and flood mapping scenarios and all that sort of thing. So yeah, a setback dike, purchase of some properties around that would be the other main source of funding that we're looking at. And then we have our ongoing operation, which I think this is outside of the fund.
For the dredging.
Yeah. But those two pieces would be, I think, looking at this point, would be a good fit for potentially that funding stream. Yeah.
Well,
And if you're ever in the area and you want to actually see it on site, or you have time, or next time you're up here, happy to take you out and show you the spots too, that helps put eyes on it.
yeah, no, I think I'd love to do a site visit like that. And I saw the news recently, there's been some support to a project just on the north side of Lillooet Lake as well.
On the north side of Lillooet Lake.
Yeah.
Oh, through Leeward, you mean? Because they're doing a bunch of stuff on the on the north side on the Pollard side of the Birkenhead River. That's almost complete. The last bit would be to tie in the new stretch of dike to the CN track, and that leads me to my next point, which I'm sure you've heard before, which is, you know, the struggle sometimes to get the attention of CN with some of our matters. So like in some of the flood mapping, for instance, and scenarios that we've done here, it's been identified. Like that's an easy example. They've just done extensive work along the Birkenhead River. It's called the Pollard Dike, and there's one weakness left in that stretch, and that's because they can't tie it into the CN rail, because CN tracks are natural dikes, right? They're built higher, they're built strong, and they have become sort of, you know, de facto dikes, just like some of our roads have over the years, right? So they've been trying to contact CN, dike conditions, I'm trying to contact CN to say, hey, how can we tie into there? We have a similar issue just over here, you know, sort of down from the liquor store area. There's a CN track that runs through there. A similar issue on Ertle Road. There's a train bridge that goes over the road. So when we've done our flood mapping, we recognize that if we had a flood, because of the way the dikes work, all the water would push through underneath this train bridge, like basically fill the opening and pour into town. You know, so there's issues like that where we struggle connecting with CN. And nothing you haven't heard before, but
And how long have you been waiting for a response from CN?
you know, I would get Kevin Clark, to our diking manager, the diking district manager, to answer that. He's been trying off and on for the you know, the Leewad's been trying for the one over the Pollard Dike. Kevin's been working hard at this one over here, as well as a couple others. So I would say months.
Okay.
Many months. many months. Yeah. So I don't know that there's what influence you might have or doors you might be able to open, but as we move down the road, it would be really nice if we can get CN to participate a little bit.
Yeah, if you could copy me on that email, just so I have it, then I'll follow up with them. It's actually their government relations person. I think it's their old government relations person. Used to actually be the executive assistant for the prime minister before he became prime minister, when he was an MP. So I met him in that capacity, but I think they have one person for all of Western Canada.
Yep.
And I think part of it is he's just very overburdened, but I can follow up on that and see if we can get something set up, because, you know, something like that where you have the town being put at risk, you know, it's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. And and we'll wait once we get further down that road, we can contact you. Maybe if we can help setting that up, that would be appreciated. They should be at the table. Their infrastructure impacts what we do here, and they should be at the table as far as I'm concerned. So awesome. Great. I don't want to Valley, go ahead.
What about regional transportation? Is a real thorn in our side. Trying to get help along those lines has been a real problem, to say the least. And we're getting letters now from the public saying, the buses are completely full. They can't get on the buses. They have to wait an extra half an hour per bus. They've only got a couple of runs a day. People aren't getting to work on time we need some help. Maybe from the federal level down to the provincial level and get that moving, because the access for people just going to Whistler to work is a major problem, but even getting from Lillooet to Vancouver, it is a major issue. People can't get back and forth, and any bus service that comes out of Vancouver right now does not connect time-wise with the bus from Whistler to here. So people are missing that bus, and then they have to find an alternate route to get home. So transportation is a real problem in this corridor, major problem.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's funding levels out there, or if there's connection between federal and provincial that can maybe start being realistic with what the needs are here.
Well, I know ever since Greyhound shut down operations in the corridor here, it's left a big gap in that service. And there's been movement for many years now to get regional transit. And one of the challenges, of course, is how do you fund that? And putting it on property taxes alone, the thinking was that would put a huge burden on Whistler. And so I think a good proposal was brought forward on adding a fuel surcharge. And so then it's not just residents, it's also tourists that would be contributing to it. But unfortunately, the province turned it down, and which is very frustrating to see. But I know more recently there's been there's a study that's being done to look at what the demand would be. And so the province is leading that. I think they're working with a company called Urban Systems.
Yeah, it's done.
On that. Oh, it's done.
Yeah, I could send it to you if you want. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, no, I'd love to see that. And I think, part of the challenge was some of that work was being done in the middle of the pandemic when, maybe less people are taking public transit. And maybe in the last year when, and obviously public transit was shut down in much of the corridor here. So I understand how big of a need it is. If there's, we know now that the new cabinet in the province is the transport minister is going to be staying in that role. And so I hope there can be some discussions set up very soon, but it'd be something I'd be happy to reach out to him to bring it up again. I know I've talked to him before about it. And, if there is a role for the federal government in that, I'd be happy to help coordinate that. When I mentioned the Greyhound shutting down, the federal government made an offer to all the provinces that would be impacted by those closures. In that if the province would commit to co-financing it, the federal government would match it so that service could be maintained. The only place across Canada where that offer was accepted was actually in BC, but not in the Sea to Sky. It was in the north, where Bus North is funded that way. But something like this is critical for not just people being able to get to work, but people being able to get to their doctor's appointments or their specialists. So it's a huge need. And, I'd be happy to do anything I can to support and reach out to Minister Fleming on that.
There's no specific funding or support from the feds for transit.
Well, we do provide dedicated support for transit. So I mentioned the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program. One of the streams is for public transit, but the way that it's allocated, it's fully up to the province how they want to prioritize that. The vast majority of that funding has gone to TransLink for some of the big projects like the expansion of the SkyTrain. But there are investments that are being made through BC Transit. But the province hasn't prioritized anything specifically on regional transit, but it has funded things like more buses for the region as well. And I would certainly support programs that would fund regional transit because, that is such a huge gap, especially what's been revealed over the last couple of years, especially with how fast the Sea to Sky is growing. I think Squamish grew by 20%, Pemberton grew by 30%. I think Whistler grew by more than 20% as well. So there was already a need, and now it's even more so.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the gas tax fund, it appears in Pemberton we're already paying it, but it's just not going to the transit. I mean, we're paying higher fuel costs here than anywhere in the province right now, or most places in the province. So for people to come on and have to pay an extra 10 or 12 cents, we're already used to that. So it's not exactly a big kick in the butt if that's what it's going to take to get it done.
Exactly.
In some of our recent conversations with the departments, there has been a renewed openness to discuss, how about that? A fuel tax, not a necessarily an openness to allow it, but whereas there was not even room to discuss it before, as part of other ideas that we're bringing forward, there seems to be an openness to look at it again. So I'm not sure that's completely off the table, but so if we were to go down there, let's say, for instance, we come up with a model that includes how we're funding, whether it's fuel tax, property tax, federal carbon tax that they want to give us, whatever those are. In terms of federal support on it, that's primarily infrastructure though, right? Like if we as a group wanted to go down that route, it would be, okay, we've got our governance model, we've got our operational funding model. We need, hey, feds, we need X amount of dollars for bus shelters and a fuel station. That sort of where it would be best to direct to the feds for funds, or is it all through the province?
It's all through the province. We do have one fund which is separate from that, called the Zero Emission Transit Fund, where you can apply to for things like electric buses. So for the infrastructure pieces, that's available. But separate to that one, we also have the fund with the province, but the province they determine where that money goes. And the other part of it is federal funding doesn't go for operations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the domain of the provinces, kind of similar to healthcare and to education. But we know that it's actually critical for Canada to meet its climate targets, that we reduce emissions from transport. And it is an area that we're funding for infrastructure. So I would have a look at that fund as well, but primarily it's through the province.
And that's the Zero Emission Fund, is that what you called it?
It's called the Zero Emissions Transit Fund.
Got it.
It's the one I like to see at the next transit committee.
And if is the I guess I'm not sure if there's been an opportunity since the municipal elections in the fall. Have the mayors been able to get together to discuss regional transit again as a group, or with the?
We did a little bit informally, I guess you'd say, at UBCM, and that's where we had a few formal and less formal conversations about fuel tax and that again. So there was some interesting conversations in the hallways, which seemed encouraging. We've met with the province to look at potentially a pilot project. The staff is working, all of our staffs are working with the provincial staff right now to talk about, so I would say we've got more traction than we've had over the last 5 years in that we're moving forward. There's a lot to iron out there, and we'll fill you in as we go, as we're able to, and we're still waiting to find out a lot more from the province, but we haven't had a formal meeting of the Transit Commission or committee since the election though. So, and I'm in regional district meetings tomorrow, and it's on my list to suggest that we organize one and get it together. So
Great.
Let you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, and whatever, along the line, as in, this is going to be something that we're working towards for a while still. So if things change with regards to support for transit federally, or if there's anything, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
Still top priority.
Definitely.
I can let go of that bone.
Yeah, I had a meeting earlier with some businesses in Squamish. They said the same thing. Being emailed from folks from Squamish. Actually received a few emails about regional transit just in the last week. So.
I mean, as you've been in part of these conversations before, and in our group conversations, it's incredibly frustrating because we are the poster area for transit. It's one road, it's linear, it's north-south. See, it's like the business case is so obvious, like Ted's saying, there's people getting off the bus in the morning because there's not enough room, and they're negotiating between skiers and workers going, okay, you got to go to work. I guess you can get on and I'll get off. You get on in the village. If you try to get on in after the village to come north, bus drivers are saying, forget about it. Go back to the village and wait for the next one, because you'll never, if you wait at this stop, it'll be full before we get here. We're looking at through the regional district, we're looking at Wedgwood, more development there. And so we're putting more pressures on transit, but we're not increasing transit. For us locally, I'm proud of what we do as a local partnership between us, LEWA and SLRD, in terms of providing the transit we do at a cost to our public. We're the only ones in the corridor that do it. we need more buses. We can't afford to keep paying for it on our own. And the idea was, once we get this fully regional transit system in place, it will absorb our regional transit. So it'll become part of that. We still have to fund it together, but it'll become part of that. And then we can focus our other attentions on just getting people from the remote areas of our valley to our new transit hub, get on the bus to go all the way down to Vancouver.
And I'm curious about that last point, sorry, if I may quickly, how does that operate for some of the people that are more remote? Is there like a car or like a yard?
We need to look at it more, Patrick. I mean, we've got a shuttle that goes to Coca-Cola, the hill in Lewan. But nothing that goes down the valley to the Meadows, and nothing that goes out to Darcy. So, we've tried, there's a lot there. There's, in terms of how much funding folks from that area want to put towards connecting to town. I think if you put a bus on there going out to Darcy, it would be empty a lot of the time. So is it a transit on demand sort of scenario that we need? I don't know if that works, but I think those are the sorts of things we have to explore. Right now, for us to put a shuttle going out to Darcy and back, for bang for your buck right now, personally, not speaking for the committee or the council, I would say we're putting it north-south, right?
Yeah.
At this point, because that's where the demand is really high. But I think if we build it, they will use it. In other words, if we can connect people to the more remote corners of the valley to us, they will eventually use it, right? And especially when we get proper regional transit, when you can take a bus from Mount Currie all the way down to Vancouver, then I believe folks from Darcy will be very motivated to get on a shuttle and, make those connections. So
Exactly.
it's the whole package, right? But it is definitely challenging in terms of costs here when remote pockets. It's not too bad. We got one main road that goes up the valley and one that goes to Darcy. It branches out a little bit. So we don't have too many catchment areas, those two main catchment areas, but it's still a cost attached, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's also, we need to get more people off the highways. The
That's
highways are so
But
bad.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's the federal government set the targets for emissions, but then it's left to, the province and us to figure it out. And it's actually not just about putting up EV stations, it's getting cars off the road and the incentive to get the car off the road and having the opportunity to have reliable regional transit and
Frictionless.
yeah. And so they need to get that message in Iowa.
No,
Right.
the message is received.
Yeah, it's really.
So what we did in 2021 is we committed to having permanent public transit funding coming to the provinces. We've actually increased the amount of funding that goes to public transit by 13 times from what was there before 2015. So there's a huge investment there, but the need is so great. There was such underinvestment for a long time. And it is critical. It's critical as we're growing. We're one of the fastest growing. I think we are the fastest growing G7 country, and we're going to need to.
And we're going to keep growing.
As we have high levels of immigration that we need to, to deal with the labor shortages as a country that's rapidly aging. But we need to have the infrastructure to support people. I mean, building homes. It also means making sure we have public transit. I couldn't agree more.
So just to pop back briefly when we were talking about housing, correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned something about some programs aimed at affordable housing, and I was just wondering when you're talking about affordable housing, what my understanding is it's usually it's focused on a certain demographic, but then basically people earning a certain income, and I was just wondering what that income threshold is, or roughly speaking, because there's affordable housing that gets thrown out, I guess, in an academic sense, is affordable housing is what people can afford on, can spend 30% of what they earn on housing. And then what I've been hearing more is people talk about affordable housing, but it seems when they talk about affordable housing, it's affordable housing for a certain demographic. And I want to be very clear, it's usually geared towards low-income individuals, which are in high need of secure housing. But I'm just wondering if I clarify on that.
Yeah. So the definitions for affordable housing, those are set actually by BC Housing in BC, and that's what CMHC, which is the federal agency, utilizes.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not always what would traditionally be, you know, 30% of your income going towards it. Oftentimes it's higher than that. Some people might refer to that as attainable housing more than affordable housing. But I know for instance, the rental construction finance initiative has to be 30% below market rates.
Okay.
And so, but the definitions that we utilize come from BC Housing, and it's really geared towards what is it's based on the region that you're in.
Okay. And then just on that, so if you're talking about the rental, that rental properties, I mean, and this may not be set by, I realize it may not be set by federal government, but are those, for those programs, are they, you know, I guess my question would be then who is able to access those? Is that going to be based on income level?
For people that are going to be renting them?
Yeah.
So it depends on the type of project that's put together. For instance, the Westwoods project, that's geared towards seniors. And so depending on the proponents, you can determine what type of group that you want to serve. It could be workforce housing, could be you know, seniors housing, it could be family homes. It really just depends on what you want to apply for. There is a scoring system that is put together, and it's too complicated for, I don't even fully understand all the details of it, but depending on what type of underserved groups that you're going to be gearing the housing towards, you score higher on it. So, so really it's up to the proponents on what they want to gear it towards.
So one of the problems we have here is we don't have land. We're very land poor. We've talked about it before in terms of a municipality. And the other thing is we have a disappearing land base, right? It's shrinking, especially at downtown area. There's only so, you know, with our geographical, agricultural land reserve, all that stuff, those constraints, there's only so many areas that are appropriate for affordable housing. So I guess my question is, you know, we're working with City Sky Community Services, that's coming. I'd like to think that the Lions Villa will be down the road shortly too, but we're going to have more needs in the future. And again, a shrinking land base. Is there any appetite, I guess, to fund land acquisition looking ahead? So in other words, I wouldn't propose a specific housing project today for Pemberton. You've got that one going, like I say, Lions will be done. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15, we know we're going to have greater needs coming. By the time that comes, everything that's available will have been developed in our little, you know, or the majority of, sure, we're opening up in the benchlands and there might be opportunities that emerge in different areas. But recognizing that we're land poor, and every time we've, you know, up until recently that we've tried to approach for funding, we've been told that you got to bring land to the table. So again, my question is there any appetite to fund land acquisition so that we have it in our inventory for 5 years, 10 years down the road when we're ready to make that next move, be it supportive housing, senior, whatever it is we need?
So there isn't a program for that right now. There is a divestment program from the federal government called the Federal Lands Program. So if there is federal land here that's not being fully utilized, for instance, oftentimes it's old RCMP land, that can be donated or sold at the cost of a nominal fee to then build supportive housing. For instance, that's what happened in Gibson's. But I don't believe there's any federal lands that are within the region here that could be suitable for that.
It's an attachment across the street, but I feel like they're going to use that as leverage for their own new development.
I know that the province has indicated a willingness to have a similar program where there's provincial crown land that they'd be willing to provide for affordable housing. But I know that was part of the campaign platform of the premier. So I don't know if that's been fully fleshed out yet,
Right.
But there isn't a federal program for acquisition of land right now.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Like I said, you're looking at, since I've been here for 30 years, in the last however many years that I've been sitting here, watching lands, you know, opportunities come up and then, or maybe opportunities come up and then go away and the land goes with them. And, you know, like that was one of the struggles in moving ahead with the project with Sea Sky Community Services is limited amount of options that can cite a development like that, right? So I just feel like I say, in 10 years, I don't know where we're going to build our next projects because we're running out of land base.
Yeah, I mean, not all programs require land to be brought to the table. Like I mean,
It's not even just the funds, or it's not even just bringing the land to the table. It's the land being available.
Yeah.
Again, as I don't know, we barely found a site for this one.
Mhm.
we're gonna keep running out of options as we go because things will get brought up and developed and zoned. You know, so if as a village, we were able to buy something or have something in the bank for the future, you know, then we know we have a site.
Yeah, well, I mean, with the rate at which Pemberton's growing, there's going to be more and more of a need for that. But it's obviously an incredibly desirable place to live. And so it's you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place there.
Yeah. Any other conversations out there we need to know about, Patrick? Any other work happening, and then what's the budget look like?
Well, I mean, the budget's just in the process of being put together right now. So consultations are happening. Actually, I'm going to be hosting an in-person one on the 6th. I'm going to be hosting a virtual one, a consultation on the 7th.
February 7th?
February 7th, yeah, 6th and 7th. And budget will probably be tabled late March, early April, but we're still under development right now.
So no teasers.
Well, I would anticipate that healthcare is going to be a big part of it right now. So there's really advanced conversations that are happening between the provinces and the federal government. There's been a lot of movement recently on this. So we've made the commitment that we're going to provide an increase in funding, but we want to make it not just be a blank check. We want to have measurable targets on it, including a strategy on sharing data and on workforce. So there's been movement recently. I'm hopeful that there's going to be an agreement sometime next month. And then there's going to need to be a commitment in the budget to help support that. And so I would expect that to be a big part of the budget this year, as well as investments on things that are going to reduce emissions and help communities adapt to climate change. So those are some things that I would foresee being in there, but it's still early on in the consultations. And we'll see what happens. And there's definitely some difficult decisions for a Minister of Finance to make. And yeah, so if you're interested in having a more formal say in the consultations, I'd be happy to share some of the information about that. But it'll be Tuesday the 7th, I think at 7 p.m.
Yeah, in the evening, 6:37.
Awesome. And the healthcare discussion, I'm assuming there'll be a component on training and increasing our available staff and healthcare workers.
Exactly. So I think there's a few components of that, and it's especially severe, the labor shortage in rural areas. So we provided funding in the last budget to provide loan forgiveness for nurses that decide to work in a rural area. So that helps quite a bit. But it's really a shortage of doctors. It's a big shortage of med school places in Canada. And, you know, we have enough people in Canada that want to become doctors, don't have enough spaces for them to go to med school here. They go to other countries. They end up paying more in other countries. And then when they want to come back and practice, they have to go through lengthy credential recognition programs. So there's all these barriers that are put up. There's been some movement more recently, particularly in BC, to provide more residency spaces and to shorten the time for credential recognition, particularly coming from countries that have very similar medical systems. So I think that will help, but we need to have more med school places. And a big focus of our immigration plan is on bringing in more healthcare workers. We're really focusing on 3 professions: healthcare, construction, and transportation. And so that'll be really, really critical to make sure. And also when we have foreign trained nurses, that they're able to quickly be able to practice their trade.
Mm. Awesome.
With your healthcare again, it's been noted that a couple of provinces are now going to private healthcare to reduce the backlog in surgeries.
Mhm.
Is that something that you can get the provinces to apply with the new funding formula that you're potentially looking at for healthcare? I know that's a provincial legislation, but you know, when you look at 10,000 surgeries behind, and yet you've got for-profit, I guess, what you'd call, available to take a lot of that load on. It seems wrong that people are waiting years to get a hip replacement or any kind of surgery like that. So I know it's hard for the federal government to impose things on the provincial government. Just look at what Alberta's doing. But it'd be nice to see something along that lines, like there's the ability for surgeries to be reduced but because they got the head wrapped around the fact they don't want to give it to a profit. So I don't know what your feeling is on that.
Yeah, I mean, the healthcare delivery is the domain of the provinces, so we can't tell the provinces what to do. But also with the Canada Health Act, there is a guarantee that healthcare shouldn't be based on the ability to pay. So there's those two things, and if provinces are moving to a completely for-profit model, we could restrict providing funds through the Canada Health Transfer as a result. So, but I think there's kind of a delicate balance to walk there, where on the one hand, you're introducing competition in a way that's going to actually improve the system, but on the other hand, you're not actually changing the way that people can access healthcare. So, there's been some movement recently with what Ontario is talking about, but from a federal government perspective, we're going to be ensuring that it's not going to be based, healthcare access isn't going to be based on just ability to pay alone.
Okay.
Anyone else guys want to poke at?
Sorry, okay, just so, I guess what I was trying to get at somewhat with my last question is just, and I don't know if this applies exactly to our context, but, are there, looking at also making housing more affordable for the middle class? Because there's definitely, there's vulnerable there's, parts of our society that are struggle to afford housing and need to be able to afford housing. But I also think particularly in this area, housing has become so acute for even people who would not qualify as low-income individuals. And it is, especially in our areas, it's having problems where you're getting young families leaving, or we talk about healthcare. I mean, if we need to be able to attract more workers here to fund to work in regional transit, to be here for our healthcare centers, they also need to be able to afford to live here. And I understand that can be a very difficult thing to tackle, but I was just wondering if there's any thoughts to it in just kind of general overall, not targeted at specific groups, but I guess, or looking at the middle class and trying to make it maybe a bit more affordable.
Yeah, I mean, so absolutely. I think there's the building of affordable housing, and then there's making housing more affordable writ large. And so we need to do both. And a big issue right now is just lack of supply.
Yeah.
And so one of the programs that we're rolling out is called the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is going to support municipalities to hire more people to do planning and to approve permits. We know sometimes that's some of the backlog. I know that the province has some plans that will could expedite some of the building approval processes as well. And we're also trying to make housing more affordable for people that are entering the market. So we have a program called the First Time Home Buyers Incentive that helps with your first purchase of a home. We're going to help create more supply by a new program called the home renovation tax credit, where if you're going to, or multi-generational home renovation tax credit, where if you're going to want to house perhaps like a senior relative or someone with a disability, you're going to get a tax credit on those renovations. And we have a number of programs like that that we're trying, that will all kind of contribute a little bit to making housing more affordable. But really what it's going to come down to is when we can get more supply on the market. So that is a really big focus. One of the things that was in the news quite a bit recently was we're bringing in a 2-year ban on new foreign ownership of homes.
Yes.
It doesn't apply in Pemberton.
Definitely.
So there was some questions about that that just went into effect at the beginning of this month.
Yeah.
But we do have a 1% tax on non-residents, non-Canadian owned real estate that's left vacant. So these are some of the things that we're doing to tackle speculation in the housing. We're also now taxing housing assignments.
Yes.
And so all of these things are meant to deal with treating housing as a commodity. But there are limits on what we can do from the federal government perspective. But we're always looking at ways where we can help be a part of the solution.
Thank you.
What about programs around retrofitting
Yes, so we have two programs. So we launched the Canada Greener Homes Grant 2 years ago, which is a $5,000 grant to do home energy retrofits. So how it works is you get a EnerGuide assessor to your home to look at where you could make savings on your with your heating costs. And so based on that assessment, they recommend where it should be spent. And so we have that $5,000 grant. Last year, we also launched the Canada Greener Homes Loan, which is a $40,000 no interest loan to do deeper home retrofits. So that's the launch last year. So we have those two programs in effect. And I think through Clean BC, there is another program as well. There's one for heat pumps that I know has been a little bit cumbersome to access, and they have similar grants as well. So you can stack these two together, which helps make a big contribution to making your house more energy efficient and actually cheaper to operate.
Interesting. One of the things I've heard from people around here is that so many people still burn wood. And a lot of these retrofit programs don't, if you're going from a fossil fuel to like a heat pump, then you're eligible, but they don't allow you, they won't fund it if you go from wood to a heat pump or if wood is your primary heat source, they won't do the retrofit on the doors or the windows or that sort of thing. I've looked it up myself because I've had a few people tell me that locally, because again, there's still a lot of people burning wood around here, and I guess looked into the program. But yeah, I haven't done a deep dive on it, but it sounds like if you have wood as your primary heat source, then it's harder to access the $5,000. And definitely it's the BC one, but the heat pump one, their priority is to get you off natural gas or propane or oil.
Yeah, it's the first I've heard of that, so I'll have to look into that. It might just be for the BC one, maybe, but I'll check that out.
Cool.
When you talked about housing and the cost of housing getting into it, every time interest rates go up a quarter point, we lose X amount of people out of the market. So when you look at how much interest rates going up in the last year, and we're worried about the middle class being able to afford to get in, trying to beat the recession is also beating people down from ever owning a home right now. And I don't know if they've ever looked at the pluses and minuses on that, but I'm sure the amount of people that have been taken out of the market with the huge increase last year far outweighs the ability to build enough houses to keep people in.
Yeah, I mean, it has a number of knock-on effects. It's also pushed up the cost of renting because they have more demand for that. And it's also made some developers skittish about building new projects because the margins are being squeezed. So it does have a really big impact on the housing market where we're seeing the most inflation anyways. So I think that has to be considered. But from the Bank of Canada's perspective, they're focused on getting inflation down to 2% or less. And so it's tricky when you have, all these things that need to be considered.
And the federal government doesn't have any say over the Bank of Canada and the rates.
No, so the only say that the federal government has is every 5 years when the Bank of Canada guidance is being renewed. That's the one time we have the opportunity. But other than that, the Bank of Canada runs independently, as it very much should, because you want to keep monetary and fiscal policy very separate.
Yeah, but it certainly is a downside to fighting recession on one side.
Also can say, I mean, I was saying this earlier, is that even before when interest rates were rock bottom, I mean, that's also part of what fueled prices going up here, because people who previously owned homes were able to utilize the increased equity and take out and buy additional homes, which was then making it jacking up price and taking down supply for people who weren't in. And so your comment about, looking at housing as a commodity, and I think that's an important part of the conversation, is how at all levels of government we're viewing housing. Because that drives our policy decisions.
Yeah.
Well, we're just about at the end of our time, unless there's any last quick questions, but
Really appreciate you.
yeah. Thanks for coming out and do this again, and thanks for getting them here on time.
Now we're to the next.
Where are you off to next?
Whistler State of the whole.
Oh, is that right?
Maybe one day you'll take the bus.
Then he won't need me anymore, so. Like, very valuable. I don't know how you hold all that information. It's a lot.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah,
Breadth of knowledge. All of your breadth of knowledge is extraordinary.
Well, again, we really appreciate the time. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, well, thank
The line's open and when you get to Worcester, let them know that we can use some funds for our local champion.
Well, I think it's also helpful that Jen is I guess she's the chair of UBCM, or what's the name of her
Yeah,
position?
you see.
President.
President.
President, yeah. So
Yeah.
got friends in high places.
Yeah, we're all.
But thank you so much for having me today.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, you've got my contact information if there's ever something that comes up that I can help out with. When you got some more information about these, particularly these, the pump station and dike projects, send that my way.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, be happy to come do another one of these sometime soon.
Good.
Hopefully we can get our meeting.
Talk to the others and.
Yeah.
Yeah, talk to the others about getting the.
No, I-
meeting going.
I haven't, but we should do that.
You send that person.
I think it was Jordan that was organizing it, right?
See him on the way.
Oh, did you hear?
It's next.
Yeah, I haven't seen him since the House Sound Forum.
Waiting in the wings,
Pardon
waiting in the wings.
me? Getting a little while longer.
Shorter commute.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Patrick? Hey, how's it going, Jordan?
He just said he hadn't seen you for a while.
No, we haven't.
No, it
been there
has.
for a while.
Yeah, I can see it.
Really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your questions.
See ya.
Nice to meet you. Thank you. See you again.
Thank you, Christina.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Really good to see you. Hey.
Got it done.
How are you? How are you?
Good. We were just talking about how we should get our
Well, yeah, exactly.
We agreed that we should send out that.
Okay. So we talked about it, I talked about it with you, I think, and a bunch of other people, so I think we were gonna get it going this month. Or it's kind of.
Their time, Elizabeth, will come back in a second here, but thanks for joining us, Jordan.
Pleasure.
It's a casual, it's let us know what you're up to and activities in Victoria, and we threw out a couple of topics for you, I think that you received by email, just what you may be hearing, be it police and cost transit, all that sort of thing, like conversation having, but It's all yours.
And you're missing one?
Mrs. Jenny, she's not here.
Oh, Jenny's not here, right? Okay. Cool, well, listen, for some of you, thought I would review a couple things just so you know what my job is as the MLA. And sometimes it's a little bit confusing, but so I'm Jordan Sturdy, MLA West Vancouver Sea to Sky, elected in 2013. I am the critic for BC Berries and aquaculture, fisheries, water resources, that sort of thing in coastal British Columbia. In terms of the role of the MLA, there's a variety of different pieces to it. First and foremost, I think it's fair to say it's constituency work. So if you as somebody who lives in West Vancouver, Sea to Sky has an issue with WorkSafe, for example, or with Front Counter BC, or with ICBC, or BC Hydro, or any of the political or the sort of the provincial entities, and you can't get satisfaction just by dealing with the organization, then it's our job to help, my office's job to help you as constituents sort of navigate your way through these challenges, come to resolution, hopefully, not always, but ideally. And that consists of quite a bit of the work that we do. So working with or having a challenge with coastal health, or having a challenge with the Ministry of Health, Child and Family Services. You got to remember that when it comes to the role of various levels of government, as you well know, the provincial or the municipal government is really on the ground delivering services, specific services to the constituents. The provincial government, and I you'll probably hear, if you haven't heard already, from other municipal leaders, that provincial or municipal entities take in 10% of the global tax collection. Others would argue it's closer to 15 or 20%, depends on how you do the calculation. But say it's 15% for argument's sake. The province brings in about 35%. And the feds take the rest. So what you guys know what you do for your 15%? What does the provincial government do for our 15% or our 35%? I should say. We deliver a transportation network, a highway system, to some degree a ferry system, as well as deliver healthcare in the provinces and through the health authorities. And an education system. So it's actually pretty robust. It's not a bad deal for all the money that's contributed. And I've said this to Patrick as well. And so then you go, okay, so for the 50%, what exactly does the federal government do? It's certainly less tangible to taxpayers. But and we also, the province, manage the provincial land base. So be it forestry, be it mining, be it energy, pretty much anything to do with the land is what the province manages. So in part, what I do as an MLA, or what an MLA's job is generally, is also to look at advocacy with the provincial ministries for a variety of different things. And one of those things that we wanted to talk about later is regional transit, for example. Now that's in our case supplied potentially by BC Transit, which is a provincial agency, or an agreement with potentially again with TransLink, which is sort of a local government or an entity around Metro Vancouver, but with significant contribution to the province and taxation authority by the province there. And so what else do we do? Look at things like the Vancouver Coastal Health Strategic Plan for facilities in the Sea to Sky. Be something that we would work on trying to advocate for, for delivery for one, but beyond that for particular outcomes. BC Housing, certainly, Pemberton's been notable in terms of success there from BC Housing in the last couple of years. One of the bigger projects that's been approved, and that's certainly something that we would work with the municipality to try and advocate to the minister and the ministry to make sure that these kind of funds Modi Capital, Modi or MOTI, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, Capital Works, Operations, access to data, that kind of thing. BC Parks, for Ministry of Forests, which used to be Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations, but has now been chopped up into a variety of different places, rec sites and trails. These are all areas where we work with the ministry, with the ministers to try and advance opportunities for us here in the region. So that's sort of the advocacy and constituency work, which probably, especially the constituency work, takes up a big chunk of what we would, of what my office does on a day-to-day basis. You'd be surprised at how many issues there are for people that I don't actually even get involved in. Most of my staff will just help sort it out through VCH or whoever it happens to be. The other part of what I do as an MLA is bills, and there's a number of different pieces there. So private members' bills are bills that individuals outside of the government side would advance to the government to hopefully have them uptake it or take it up and advance it. So some of the pieces that are in there right now are there's one that's been there for a couple of years, which is equal pay for work of equal value, for gender equity, pay equity, gender pay equity. And, you know, it often does realistically, the feds, or the government doesn't tend to be super enthusiastic about these things. They will look at them reluctantly occasionally, but generally they try and do their own thing. But it does raise the profile and raises questions and causes the government sometimes some uncomfort, like why are we not advancing a bill on gender equity, gender pay equity in British Columbia? Like, why not? It seems like a bit of a no-brainer. Okay. In terms of what I've brought forward a number of different pieces of private members legislation, one of which is relative to regional transit, and we can talk about that. Another one relative to residential or Crown land residential lease rates, and how the province is, for some reason, the only landlord in the province that can raise rates exponentially. Every other landlord in the province is limited to what, 0.5 or 2%, something like that. This year, CPI generally is what it is. I think this year was less than CPI. But the province can raise rates however they want. So we put forward a piece of legislation to say you should hold yourself to the same standard as a landlord as every other landlord in the province. Now, they weren't enthusiastic about that particular piece of legislation, but it creates it creates a profile for some of these issues. There's another piece that's a private bill, but we won't necessarily go into that because it's not really germane here. But and then there's the rest of the legislation. And so, you know, here at the municipal level, you do, you know, first, second, third reading, and then fourth and final reading. We have it's a similar in the province. So you've got first reading, which is basically just an introduction. The ministry will stand up, read the purpose of the bill, and it's accepted by the House, generally speaking, and then that's it. Second reading debate is where everybody gets up and makes speeches about the particular piece of legislation. So that can go on for days or weeks at times, or very, very short and sweet, and just move on to the third reading, which is the committee stage, which is where you look at a piece of legislation on a clause by clause basis, and you'll explore that clause for its implications, for its policy, for its direction, for whatever is relevant to that particular clause, and debate a piece of legislation on clause by clause basis, looking for unintended consequences, intended consequences, really even just like, what are you trying to accomplish here? And that often takes that's probably the most interesting piece in many respects, because it really does help explore the purposes of this legislation that's been put forward, and can expose unintended consequences, and ultimately that's typically where there is it's really the only opportunity for amendment. And then what we call, we don't really have a fourth reading, but what is it, assent, Lieutenant Governor, assent, Crown is like basically just say, okay, it's done. And it's quite funny actually, because they, on the, what is it, what's the term? Having trouble remembering here, but they,
It's the royal assent.
the royal assent, there you go. So thank you. So it's funny because the LG will come in sometimes on royal assent, walk up, the speaker vacates the chair, the lieutenant governor will go up to the speaker's chair, sit down, and then the clerk will come up and read out the Crown doth assent to, and read out the list of bills and fold up the folder. The LG gets up and walks out. So it's kind of wonder sometimes what's the point of this, but anyway. Let's see, so where are we here? Okay, so that's the sort of the provincial process, and then there's my critic role, so as a critic for BC Ferries, fish, aquaculture, coastal communities, water strategy, wild salmon initiative, that sort of thing. My role is to pay attention to these things as legislation gets brought forward. If there's a piece of legislation or a policy or a report, but specifically a piece of legislation that's brought forward that my critic role would cover, then it's my responsibility to understand that legislation, to inform my colleagues about what it means and the implications, to recommend a course of action on that legislation, and then debate it in the House. So you lead off on a second reading debate, and then be responsible for the third reading committee stage debate on a clause by clause basis. And then also be available for comment on any of those issues. And as well as an MLA, you're responsible for commenting naturally in terms of the media inquiries relative to your writing and your critic role. And then also overall to just work collegially and collaboratively with both your colleagues, your caucus colleagues, as well as your opposition or the government members or opposition, depending on what side you're sitting on. And because ultimately we're all there for the same purpose, which is to make British Columbia a better place to be. Then the last process is the budget process. And that's one that is quite interesting. It has more opportunity than virtually any other for us. And that is where the budget is. First, there's a throne speech in a couple of weeks, actually early February, and then later on in February or early March, there'll be the introduction of the budget. And that really identifies how much money the government's going to spend, how much they're going to bring in, and then on the expenditure side, specifically where all that money is allocated to. So this year, I'd be surprised if we're not bringing a provincial budget in over $70 billion, which is kind of interesting because when I first started in 2013, I think we were at like 52 billion. So it's only been 10 years and we're already up over 70. But why that brings opportunity is because every minister has to defend their budget. It's broken up into ministries. It's a great opportunity because the minister is there in the committee room with all their support staff. So in question period, you get up and back and forth, and a lot of it's sort of theater. But in the estimates debates, the minister may have 10 or 15 staff there with them who are able to answer very, very specific questions and really dive into the details. So you try not to get into, how many pencils are you buying, but you do want to understand where the priorities are. So for, MOTI, for example, the opportunity is there to look at regional transit, to explore like is there money associated with the budget for regional transit for the Sea to Sky this year or not? What's the capital allocation? What are the capital priorities for the Sea to Sky? Can we put add this to the list? You get to really dive in a little bit deeper and really better understand what the government intends to do, and also get them on the record to say, yes, this is what we're going to do this year. And then that gives us an opportunity to hold them to account, although it's sometimes hard to get them to commit to anything. So it's, but it creates an opportunity for communities through the MLA to ask some of those questions. Now, in this year, the spring session is truncated by a week or two, so there'll be a little bit less time, but, and it's hard to know how much time allocation we'll get for different ministries. And that's more determined when it comes to the House leaders' priorities in terms of how we're going to allocate time in terms of exploring things. So probably there'll be a lot of time spent on housing. There'll be a lot of time spent on with the Attorney General and the Solicitor General on public safety and that sort of thing. And then there'll be a lot of time spent with the Health Minister on, ensuring that we're getting where we need to go with the provision of healthcare to British Columbia. So that's sort of and that takes up the spring session, which is February through to the end of May, normally the beginning of June, but as I said, it was shortened a little bit this year. And then the fall session is usually the beginning of October or the end of September through to the end of November, early December, depends on the year. So that's sort of the role of the MLA. Do you have any questions, clarification? All right. So Mike had provided me with a little bit, a couple of issues he wanted to talk about.
And basically just, seeing if there's any conversations happening in Victoria with regards to some of the topics that you've been involved in, are major interest to us. Regional transit, I don't know if there's anything happening in the halls we need to know about. We've been trying to make a case at UBCM and with ministers to say that the whole policing funding model is terribly broken. Once you get over the 5,000 population, I don't know if there's any discussion, and we got a resolution and through UBCM. So whether there's any conversation happening around that. And then maybe a couple other.
Sure. Well, why don't we start on regional transit?
Yeah.
So, as you know, that's certainly something I've been pushing for what, 15, 20 years now, but one of those pieces of private members legislation that I brought forward was reflective of the work that we've done through the BC Transit 25-year Transit Futures Plan for the Sea to Sky, and the MOU of the communities, the municipalities, regional district, and First Nations to prefer a transit commission model. The part of the problem with that transit commission model is that First Nations are not eligible. It's only to sit on the commission. It's only elected officials, local government elected officials. So I put forward a piece of legislation that I worked with the clerk's office in the legislature to draft. So it works well. There's no reason it couldn't just simply be adopted. And it's a nonpartisan piece of legislation, and that was to make First Nations elected officials eligible to sit on a transit commission in British Columbia, which is a prerequisite for us to have a transit commission that's inclusive. So that's one of the pieces that needs to happen. That's sort of a minor piece to some degree. The more major piece is the funding component. And there hasn't really, for the last several years, not really been any increase into BC Transit funding. What was the increase that was in the budget last year was simply to cover the expanded hours that were already committed to the previous year. So it was essentially flat. So going forward, we'll see a budget in about a month, give or take, and that will be indicative as to whether or not there's any commitment from the province to look at regional transit for the Sea to Sky. Because if there's no money in there, if it's again flat, or it just looks to cover increased wage costs, and increased operating costs, which there'll have to be some sort of bump in the whole thing. But we're looking for what, probably on the provincial side, $2 to $3 million at least. And then the same for the municipal side. So that'll help us better understand whether there's a commitment there or not. It's not like they don't know. It's not like it hasn't been said a million times. It's not like it's not logical. They don't really like they haven't liked the funding formula, which is, as you probably know, is a recommendation around a transit fuel tax. But because they don't want to be seen to be increasing taxes, although it's ironic because there's, I think, 18 or 22 taxes that have been either new or increased. So why the reticence for this particular one, I'm not really sure. But it's logical. I think the only fair option is the funding formula that's been proposed in the MOU. And I certainly support all that. So, and some of the calculations we did around fuel costs here, which is another issue. I think, as we all understand, we're paying. Well, we should be. We're not. We pay a transit tax, but of 7 cents, but we're not paying the TransLink levy of 18.5 cents. So there's a differential right there. Plus, we're typically paying more than Metro Vancouver, or have for the last couple of years. So we're looking at somewhere between 20 and 25 cents a liter in excess cost that there's no rationale for. And it's just because they can, I guess, which is, it's interesting because 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. We were generally paying less in the Sea to Sky because of a reflection of the lack of TransLink tax. Not the case anymore. My calculation was based on, I think, 60 million liters a year, give or take, that we're consuming or we're purchasing here in the Sea to Sky, based on 2018 numbers. That's about $15 million a year that's being extracted from the Sea to Sky, and money that could well be used for more productive purposes for those of us who live here. So and the reason I went into it a little bit is I have been I've been corresponding with Bruce Ralston, who was the Minister of Energy, Petroleum Resources, and something else. But yeah, about some work that was done in 2019, which is the Fuel Price Transparency Act. And that was a piece of legislation which was to help people better understand fuel pricing at a wholesale and a retail level. We were able to get Squamish as one of the examples of the communities that needed to better understand this, and that looked like there was it was not being treated fairly, or was not being dealt with fairly. And so they did pay attention to it, and they did identify 10 cents at a wholesale level that nobody can seem to understand why that 10 cents is there. And then additional undetermined amounts of money, but certainly additional money in a place like Squamish. So that work is done by the BCUC, which is the agency that is tasked with doing that work. They really didn't do anything with it. So that was 2019. 2020, they started the work. BCUC started the work. They didn't actually, they did the work, and they identified these numbers, but they didn't actually do anything with it after that. So they are going back on a second round. We have got Squamish again being refocused on. So what has changed, if anything? And they're doing a little bit deeper dive on it. And another report is coming out imminently, or I was told it was imminently, back in October. So that would sound to me like right now. We've got another letter out there asking when it's going to actually happen. Well, Ralston got shuffled out in DeForest, and Josie Osborne got moved from Land Wars into Energy Mines. So, and Josie's I've known Josie for a long time, and United, I think good, well, we're friends. And so, my intention is to orient her next week when we're back in Victoria to my request with Bruce, which was, listen, we've identified there's extra money being extracted from the corridor for no good reason. And why can we have BCUC put a package together and the province put a package together and submit it to the Competition Bureau in Ottawa to have it examined? Because Alberta has done this, and I think British Columbia and certainly the Sea to Sky has a good case for that we're being overcharged, and even if these guys are not necessarily working overtly together, they certainly seem to have a coordinated approach somehow. So Bruce was a bit reticent to do it for whatever reason, but he kept putting me off and saying, "Oh, BCUC is doing more work," and So we'll see what happens. But I think I'm hopeful that I can get Josie to do it. She has the same issue out in Tofino as well. So although the price in the island seem to be a little bit less for some reason than over here, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But
so we were talking about it earlier on our lunch break, and we were going to bring it up in the open to discuss part of my report to approach Petro-Canada and the AC, although that's in a changeover now, to say, what the heck? Why are we paying 13 cents more than Squamish? However many cents more than Lillooet? Same amount, if not more, than Metrovan with their TransLink tax on there, and just try to put it to them again. I don't know that it will result in much, except letting them know that we noticed that they're grinding.
I'm sorry, you're going to send that to
Petro-Canada.
Yeah.
We're going to go ACT, but I think that's changing ownership now. So
Not
is
AC, Husky.
or Husky, sorry.
Kids, yeah, they're rebranding the co-op.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's worthwhile, maybe discuss it, but point being, it's a grind. It's ridiculous. We thought we'd do what little we can, which would be send a letter on behalf of the residents saying, what the heck? Why? Can you please provide some explanation? Is there anything you can provide us to support that letter? Should we wait till you had a couple more conversations to send that letter? Or do you want us to CC you on that letter so that?
Well, I would say that let's see what BCUC's report says.
Did that come out soon?
Well, it was imminent in October,
Right.
so soon, I hope.
I think it said March 2022
Yeah.
on the website here.
Well, there was another report that was, there was one that came out about a year ago or a year and a half ago, and then there's, anyway.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be useful to have that. And then I get have an opportunity to understand whether Josie's willing to support me or not on a submission to the Competition Bureau.
Okay.
So I'd say a month for now, and then we can have another conversation about what data we have. And then I thought that even if we don't go to the Competition Bureau, if the province won't put a package together, then my office can put a package together, although it has a lot more oomph behind it if the province is behind the whole thing. And then maybe what we do is we put this package together and then get all the communities in the corridor to have a look and see if they endorse the submission.
So we can, because it's different now, like there's a discrepancy, whereas we were kind of bouncing back and forth with Squamish, we are consistently
Higher?
by 12 cents minimum.
Oh, is that right?
Consistently for the last 6-8 months. So if it helps to wait, I'm happy to wait to do it. Part of my thinking was do it in an open meeting. Do I expect much response from the Petro-Canada owners? No, but maybe the media picks up on it. Maybe there's some benefit from that side. So maybe
we can make their response public and see what you have to say. And just so you know, we're doing this in a public forum.
Mhm.
So that was sort of my thinking in doing it.
Yeah,
Opposed to the actual, just by exposing them a little bit more. If people don't get it, people ask the question all the time, why me more? Or doesn't, a lot of people don't even know there's an 18.5 cents tax in the city, right? So
yeah.
this was more of a way of outing them.
Well, and with work we did in the past, this was probably 10 years ago, and it was identified that the transportation cost, we wanted to factor that in. At the time was 0.5 cent a liter. So.
Yeah, and that doesn't work anymore. Like you said, it's cheaper on the island, it's cheaper in Little.
Well, I think the island, it's a little, I don't know why, but I think they get their fuel from Cherry Point or Anacortes from the States. So maybe there's an issue there, I don't know. But to me, the Metro gets it from Chevron or from whatever they're called now in Burnaby. And the Metro Vancouver stations get it from Burnaby, just like we do. The only differential is the cost to get it here. And Kamloops gets it from the Kinder Morgan pipeline, I think, or in accessing it out of Kamloops, but sometimes they can also get it from Alberta, so where it is cheaper.
What about like Prince George and northern area?
There's a refinery in Prince George, so they're a little bit different. Plus, those when you're in Prince George or north, you have to compete with Alberta. So, whereas we in the Lower Mainland don't really, I guess they just don't think they have to compete. But then they are competing to some degree in Metro. They just, for whatever reason, don't compete out here. The same is true for the Fraser Valley because they don't have a TransLink tax. So we should be the same as the Fraser Valley. Less any additional transportation cost, which is minimal.
Well,
and I'm not saying one way or the other, but I think there is a little more information coming hopefully shortly. And then I'll get a better sense from the minister whether she's willing to support the whole idea or not. And you could go and to correspond with the fuel companies. Say, hey,
I should wait for that information.
well, yeah, either way, I'm not sure that we could build on it too. We can build some momentum. We can work together on it. So I don't know. 6 one up doesn't the other.
Yeah.
But getting whatever report, like wouldn't want to make some assertions and then have this report come out and say, oh no, it's not a problem. Or there's lots of rationale for it or whatever and get undermined. I think we want to be on, a little more information is better.
Well, maybe we'll wait a little bit, and if you get a sense that DCEC report's not going to come out, or we don't have choices to support, it's not going to happen for a while, then let us know and we'll proceed. But to your point, if it's coming out shortly and there's information that we can build on, then we'll wait a little bit. And that sounds like worth waiting for a little bit, but I don't want to wait too long because.
No, don't get it. I want to get it sorted before the summer because we spent a lot of money on the farm putting diesel into tractors. And diesel's even worse.
So in another area, I'm wondering if there's potential for you to support. You've been involved in some of the conversations with MOTI regarding contracts around our culverts, road maintenance, infrastructure maintenance, and how it's affecting us with regards to flooding. Whether it's some of the culverts up the valley, Grandmother Slough, a few of those places that, as you know, we collectively have been banging our head against the wall to get better response to, and the go-to answer has been our infrastructure is not at risk. So we've been trying to dig deeper with MOTI to say, well, is that your criteria? It doesn't matter that our lands are flooding because your culverts are blocked, your infrastructure is not at risk. If so, can I please get that in print? And is what I've always wanted. But all that to say, are you having any conversations about this? We're trying to force the hand a little bit, get better maintenance going on.
Well, on a variety of different issues. The culverts are and the responsibility of MOTI around flood protection as well as overland flooding as a result of their infrastructure. It does require some clarity. There's no question about that. And yes, I understood that. I pointed that out to Kevin that as per their contract, you know, the response well, from a contractual perspective, from the contractors. If a culvert's plugged, they don't care, doesn't have anything to do with them unless it causes the road to blow out, in which case. If they didn't do the maintenance, then it will have an impact on the contract. So they don't care, and they really can't be forced to do it as per the contract, because you know, the infrastructure is fine. So there's nothing to call them on. So we really have to amend the contract or get some clarity from the province on whether that things like culvert blockages and the impacts on upstream lands is a responsibility of the crown or the holder of that piece of infrastructure. So Kevin was working on a letter to the minister's office to get some clarity on this. And I've been working with him to help to nuance it a little bit or maybe tighten it up. But and I sure will get just a boilerplate response. I won't say anything, but my intention, given the reasonable allowance for time, will be to try and get clarity on this with the minister through the estimates process.
So my follow-up question is, one of the things we're going to be talking about later is LMLGA resolutions. Is there anything from that side and then on TBCM that we could be pressuring province for to get there to that point with regards to the fact that, you know, that their criteria, that their infrastructure is okay and therefore everything's okay. That's not the case. Is there some way we can influence that through UBCM resolution?
Yeah, and well, you know, you go through LMLGA and UBCM, but you've seen that resolutions book and you know what happens to when it gets given to the government. Like really, it's true. It doesn't really do anything, but it does raise the profile. The media looks at it and goes, oh, look at what these guys want to do. And sometimes it's, you know, they're really wingnut kind of initiatives, and other times they're very reasonable and responsible. So it's a bit of a grab bag at the end of the day. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to put forward a resolution. It's not a huge amount of work. You just need to draft something reasonable. Come on, Sheena, it's not a big amount of work. It's the draft. I mean, a little bit of back and forth on wording, but then you just have to submit it to LMLGA and defend and support it. Speak to it, and then then speak to it to UBCM. So I don't know. I don't see the downside to doing it personally. But you know, like we got to talk more. You should really think hard about what you want to say. Because you don't want a 2-page resolution, obviously.
No, and again, no. To me, it's somewhere around the fact that, and I don't have the wording at hand right now, but it's around the fact that, again, their criteria is culvert plugged or not. If their infrastructure is not being impacted, they're fine. There should be some increase to that. However, if MOTI infrastructure is resulting in flooding of upstream lands, then something should be done about it. I don't know.
No, you're quite right. I think that there's a basic concept that you can't transfer risk to somebody else.
Yeah. So I don't know.
You build a piece of infrastructure to flood somebody else, that you're transferring risk. So I don't. But there's also, not being a lawyer, I you don't know exactly what the concept or the jurisprudence is, if that's the right term, but there's a public good associated with that piece of infrastructure as well. So does it balance off?
Mm-hmm. Don't worry, Sheena, I'm going to the SLRD and make them do stuff.
Yeah.
Thinking regional and.
Yeah, well, mostly it's outside the village, so.
Anybody jump in at any point here? I'm just trying to cover it. Let's go ahead.
I'm just gonna revisit the regional transit thing, because my frustration is not directed at you, it's just when I hear you say you've been working on this for 15 years, you've been hearing the same thing, and I'm thinking, are we in 4 years gonna be sitting here in the same place, or 8 years? And I guess my question is, we know we're at a critical turning point in the state of the world, right? And what more can we do as a municipal government we know we need better regional transit. We need it now. And I don't want to be sitting here in 4 years having this conversation. You know, we're getting letters from our constituents. People who are moving to the community and then realizing they can't actually get to work. That's not helpful. And then just the whole climate issue as well. We need cars off the road. So I guess I'm just looking to you you've been in this for a long time. What do we need to do differently, I guess? To apply pressure or?
Well, I mean, obviously, one of the ways to be successful at it would be to say, we're gonna pay for it all. You know, or we want this and we support the property tax model, which is traditionally how it's paid for. It's a 52-48 split. So the province pays 48%, the local government pays 52%, but gets offset by the fare box. The problem is that based on the assessment model, Whistler pays about 70% of the bill and would get 25% of the benefit. So it's not equitable. But that seemed to be the biggest objection to the whole thing, was the funding model.
And I guess what concerns me is that, I mean, so much of Whistler is reliant on workers from here, you know, I mean.
Well, do you know a little bit of the backstory there?
I'm sure I don't know half of the backstory.
Well, when I was the mayor here,
Yeah.
Ken Melamed said, pulling the pin on transit to Pemberton. We are defunding it, and we're defunding our transit to Squamish as well. We had a regional transit system, didn't go to Vancouver, but and
that was in what year?
that would have been about 2008, something like that, 2007.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was and because they were putting in the policy at that time where they wanted to retain employees within the community, and they felt that Pemberton should not grow and Pemberton should not be part of their employment strategy. So they defunded the whole thing, which is a bit of a drag. And then then Greyhound pulled the pin, whatever that was, 2012 or 14 or 15 or whatever it was. So that, because we used to, through the regional district, offset the additional costs for Greyhound transit. We did have better transit than we do now.
But so now we're now, back then we were facing it. We just didn't realize we were facing an environmental crisis either. So we've now got two issues that we're dealing with. So times have changed. So, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but we can't, I don't have to tell you this, but we can't sit here and do the same thing over and over again and expect, you know,
yeah,
we're going to get the same, you know.
Well, we recognize, of course, that in 2030, you won't be after 2030, you're not going to be able to buy an internal combustion engine vehicle. So we're going to regional, you know, we're going to clean energy vehicles over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. But the issue, the bigger issue for me is that regionally, is that we have basically a 2-lane highway, 1 lane in either directions with a bunch of passing lanes. And we're seeing, what do we see? 22% growth in Squamish, 18% in Whistler, and 34% here in Pemberton. I don't really see that. We might not see the same kind of major spike over the next couple of years, but there's no question we're going to see additional growth. We're adding 100,000 people a year to the province. Some of them are going to end up here. So, you know, congestion is going to be a limiting factor. So there's a couple of things we need to pay attention to. One is the regional transit piece, because we have to steward the capacity that we have. You know, when I started working at Whistler Blackcomb in 1989, and I was a ski patroller doing the weather. I'd have to be at work at 6 o'clock. I'd leave my farm at 6 or 5, whatever, heading to work. I'd be like the only guy going to Pemberton or going to Whistler at first thing in the morning. Well, you know, now you got to spend an extra 15 minutes to get to work. So, yeah, no, we have to manage that capacity. There's no question about that. And regional transit's the low hanging fruit on that.
It totally is, yeah. And I guess what I'm just gonna say is, we don't want to be here in 4 years. And we have a responsibility,
Yeah.
to step it up. And I'm looking for guidance.
Yeah, well, at UBCM, it's, yet another meeting. Well, first of all, let's see what happens in the budget. Let's see if there's any bump at all in the budget. I'll try through estimates. If there isn't, I'll try and get something out of the minister as to why he doesn't support regional transit investment, or what the obstacle is, what the objection is, what's the problem. And they have said it's really, and my Mike's been in all these meetings too, at the end of the day, it's the funding formula that seems to be the biggest obstacle. Although that can camouflage other things like the capital cost of buses and all that, and a regional maintenance center as well needs to sort of.
Those are manageable pieces though, and there's funding.
I agree.
For those pieces as well. Those are the infrastructure funding bits, but yeah, I mean, if there will be.
The fund.
Oh, that, what I was just saying, because if I understood correctly, is that there's funds federally for the infrastructure, but it's also, that requires provincial government. They're the ones who control where it goes, but.
Right, they prioritize.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that might help set it up. The funding model is the operational funding model. When we first presented this as a committee wanting to be a commission. So Jordan said, when we first created a partnership and decided on a one membership per community format, one vote per member format sort of thing, which I think was very good for Pemberton. I fought hard to get that, and we formed that commission wanted to form that commission with the First Nations, and found out they're not eligible, as Jordan said. So that was we created a shadow committee. So the shadow committee then put together, with staff's help, obviously, funding and a governance model. The governance model includes the commission, all that, and that's all workable. Some of the core infrastructure, we can crack that, and it's that ongoing funding piece. When we first brought as a committee to the province saying, hey, we will add a 5-cent fuel tax. Look, we got all this room, and went on from there to lay out the funding model. They went, no, not a chance. We don't want to add new taxes. The mayors and chiefs of the area said, we'll take the heat. We want regional transit for our area. We'll take the heat for the new tax. Doesn't even have to be on the province. They still didn't want to touch it. So we went back and forth, and the response was get creative.
Yeah. How many times did you hear that?
Exactly. And it's
okay, give us some new tools then.
Yeah, exactly. We only have limited ways to bring in taxation. It's either property tax, fuel tax. Like there's not a lot of other ways we can collect that money, and not without the province's support. So the get creative bit really kind of annoyed all of us. We tried a little bit, went back and forth, changed government, changed ministers. In our last meetings in September, as I mentioned earlier, there was some slightly more hopeful talk about an openness to discuss a fuel tax or other funding models. Haven't heard anything since. We got to set a meeting. But that's number one. So the funding model and how we attack that without going right to our taxpayers, that's the single biggest stumbling block. Hopefully within the budget, there will be a little something, and I'm slightly optimistic because what we're working with, without going into a ton of detail, we're working with the province now on a potential pilot program for our region. So that's why I shake my head. So it's not just me being optimistic saying we won't be sitting here in 4 years.
Yeah.
It is optimism, but it's also, hey, we're actually for the first time working towards something. Whether I at this point in time feel it's what we need or not, I'm on the fence about that, but we're working towards it, and we'll see what that looks like. At least it's a willingness from the province to work with us towards some sort of model to fill that huge hole here. If we can move ahead with the pilot, whether they decide that they will throw something, we've asked that question directly, throw some funding behind it. That remains to be seen. We'll see through the budget process. But
And just some clarification, the multimodal transport hub, that, correct me if I'm wrong, that needed to be built before.
No,
that was our own initiative. And in part that
We don't have the buses we don't have the.
yeah, that was us looking ahead. That was us going, hey, we want to build.
There wasn't a requirement that had to be built before. Okay.
No,
Yeah.
that was federal.
Yeah, okay. That was federal though, right?
Yeah.
federal funds, but it was also, there was conversations with our partners, you heard Patrick asking earlier about getting people from remote corners.
Yep.
Our transit partners were keen on seeing a transit hub developed so that we can facilitate those. Okay. But also, I feel like we've built for the future. with
Yeah,
this hub.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's not, you know what I mean? Like, and recognizing that we're gonna lose the sight on the highway.
It supports ride sharing.
Yeah.
Carpooling, all that sort of stuff. So it just made a lot of sense. And it's land that's pretty much useless otherwise. Underneath the power line.
Yeah. We only got a few more minutes. Any conversation? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just that I've been asking for that demand study that they did.
Have you not seen that either?
No.
Yes.
Yeah. You seen it?
Yeah, we'll get it to you.
Okay.
Okay, well, I just made the same promise to Patrick, he hasn't seen it either. I'm not too sure why, but
Yeah. What does it say?
it's pretty interesting. There's not a lot of surprises in it. One of the pluses, and this is going back to, it was like spring or something that it was presented to us.
What, last spring it was presented?
Summer, maybe the summer.
Really?
It was in the fall. It's been a long year. Really long year.
Oh, I'm sure we asked last summer. And this is
Anyway,
not finished.
and there was no big surprises. One of the things that was encouraging was it really the Pemberton numbers showed strong, even though we're the smallest community
Yeah.
in the mix. The demand here, even with our current system, showed strong. So I think that benefits us. I didn't agree with some of it's not that I didn't agree. I was surprised by some of the findings in terms of where they say the demand lies and the ability to fill it. So through this demand study, they feel that there is enough surplus within private providers to be able to fill some of that gap. Again, maybe just for the short to midterm, maybe as a pilot, maybe moving along. But so there was a few findings in there that I was, okay, to me, we did a demand study, whatever it was, 8 years ago, proved the case. The case is like self-explanatory now. I mean, all the numbers he gave, population increase, to me, it's an obvious one. The demand study showed a little bit of room in there that I didn't think existed, but no real surprises.
Yeah. I'm a little apprehensive about that private sector piece because all that'll end up happening is that they end up taking the only profitable bits and pieces. And then they'll leave the dregs for the public system to.
I got a lot of qualms about it, but the good news is it's forward progress of some sort. And the committee has said, you know what, let's work with you guys. Let's work with the province. Happy to do it as long as our values are being met for this transit system. And that means, again, frictionless to accessibility to, all the stuff that's important for us in terms of what that transit system looks like. And that will include, so we're like, hey, province, thanks. We're going to keep working with you. Let's go. And we will. Here's what's really important to us about our transit system. If you feel you can make that work within the private public pilot program, let's do it. But prove that out with us. We're going to go through that process of proving.
I don't know if you had a chance to see the chief, Squamish chief last week, I think, but there's some stats published on where Squamish is commuting to. And it was quite interesting. It's actually, I think for employment anyway, there is, I want to say it was 7% of the employment population was going to Whistler every day. And 5% was going to Vancouver. I think that was a bit of a surprise. It was, I thought it was the reverse, I thought was pretty true, but.
It speaks to that in the demand study, but I thought it was the reverse as well.
Yeah, no, it's more going to.
Now going south and north.
Not yet. Yeah, it's higher going north. But anyway, it's a significant number.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it speaks to the opportunity.
Any thoughts or any conversations you've had or thoughts around how we can continue to have the conversation around increasing costs?
So you probably saw the report. There's a committee of the legislature that on renewing the policing act, updating the policing act. It was a long process. I think Karen made some submissions. I don't know if you did, But one of the recommendations is that and it was comments from a variety of different communities are of this size around the province, that jumping from, 5%, once you hit the 5,000 mark, it was too much of a hurdle to get over, and it had too much cost. And then they're looking to the 10,000 didn't make a lot of sense either. So they're looking for a more gradual
But that's the
approach.
And that's why we put a resolution.
Yeah.
UBCM on that. We also have ministers meetings on that. And that's what we've done to date. And any opportunity I have any year, I'm gonna keep filling that earful of it, because we've got a few years before we hit that threshold.
Yeah.
So any opportunity that you know of to help make that case. We're also here, like, these guys are looking at rebuilding their detachment. And we're like, okay, well, we're on the cusp of taking that cost over. You're out on your own deciding how much and how big it is.
Well, yeah, get them to do it, because then it's done.
Yeah, but
Otherwise, they sit around and wait until we have. to pay for it.
100% agree, but we would like some sort of input or contact on it, as recognizing that this is gonna be coming out of our wallet sooner than later, right? So I agree, let's get it done. Don't wait for us to rebuild it, although there has always been that interest here about fire hall.
Yeah. Yeah. Try service building.
Oh, but
Yeah.
anyway, I just,
Hopefully not.
or is if there, it's an open question, if there's ever an opportunity.
Well, I expect that there may well be something, because this police report was, I think, submitted to the Ledge last
Spring, last April or something, May. And it had a whole bunch of recommendations. Now, some of them, like resolutions, to UBCM. One of the first ones was that that we go to a provincial policing model. So whether and I've heard the government, the minister, not be supportive of a provincial model. So how much of it they take, I don't know, but the chair of the committee was a government member. The majority of the committee was government members, and so some of these funding issues were recommendations of the committee, unanimous recommendations of the committee. So I expect that we'll see some legislation this spring relative to policing models, especially on the Indigenous side. So how do we incorporate Indigenous values and UNDRIP or DRIPA into the policing model? So I wouldn't be surprised to see something come forward, which would give us an opportunity to explore that a little bit further. And I think there probably will be a recognition, because that 5,000 was enough. And when policing, those thresholds were created back when it cost, $60,000 a member.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know it more like $150,000 a member now. So these are big numbers for small communities to manage.
So, yeah, go ahead. Any opportunity, you can let us know, and
Absolutely.
we'll jump in there for sure.
Absolutely.
And one of the questions I'd asked is, I don't know whether it's staff or yourself, I'd like to know what kind of costs we'd be looking at. If you're looking at 6 or 7 members, you're looking at $1,050,000. At 70%, we're looking at $700,000. I want to know those numbers before budget, so we can start putting reserves away, because you can't hit people with $700,000 for a bunch of years, let alone a short period of time. So hoping I'll get that for budget.
What are you thinking about in terms of population forecast? What do you think we'll
We did
hit?
that 5,000.
What do you like?
You have like,
Four now, aren't you?
we're at like 36, I would guess right now. We were at 34 at the census.
Okay,
So,
Yeah.
to whatever. See how the growth continues on. And then you have, I think it's a year or 2 years before, 2 years before you pick up the extra cost. So it's not the moment you get over 5,000, you have some transition period.
is that
I don't know.
is that based on census?
Yeah.
So,
Next census,
right, so which is 5 years from now.
yeah, and then we should have some time. Let's say we hit that at the next census in 5 years, then we have another year or two, I forget,
Yeah.
2 years, and there's a to make that transition.
Yeah.
Which, even I agree with that, you want to start considering it ahead in your budget, but there's nothing we could do in advance that will really take the.
Yeah,
take the hurt off of it, right? I mean, it's still gonna be, and it just doesn't make sense to go from here to here with no transition. What the hell?
But we've got to build that transition. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We got to be realistic and say, we're going to be hit with a
Some,
certain amount. So let's start putting in 2% this year, another 2% next year. And build it up. So in 7 years, 7, maybe 10 max. We've got some funding there so that people are already up to where it's going to cost. If we don't do that, I wouldn't want to be sitting in this chair.
Yeah, oh, you will be, Ted.
When you're in the community, you can vote for you.
But listen, just one other thing I thought okay, what do I have? A transit, highway maintenance, emergency management. I'm not sure why I put that one down.
I had diking down and to do with what the government's doing about the regional district.
Yeah, well, believe you me, I've spent a lot of time working to keep the PVDD intact. You know, and the basic argument being that 70% of the revenue comes from the village and 90% of the dikes are in the regional district. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for either jurisdiction to have it. And given the capacity issues, they have experience, they have they've got the good staff right now, and you know, it makes sense to keep it. I do understand why they want to get rid of them generally, like a small little improvement districts that are poorly a poor process and unaccountable, and you know, there are issues there. But in our case, it's the biggest psychic district in the province, and it makes a lot of sense to keep it. Coordinated emergency management approach obviously makes a lot of sense, especially in this jurisdiction with 3 different entities here. Visitor management, another provincial issue. So there's you know, how we're seeing increasing visits. How do we manage those visits? What are our priorities? And just so from my perspective, I'm a big fan of concentrating impacts as opposed to dispersing them. And so I've not been supportive of some of these initiatives like around Joffrey, for example, and saying you can't go to Joffrey unless you get a ticket. And so what's the unintended consequence of that? You just go somewhere else. It's not like they're not coming. So Joffrey, just so you know, when it was first created, there was always an intention to do a one-way loop trail at the site. And so you could push a lot of people through that trail. Most people won't go to the second lake or the third lake, but either a loop trail down to the lake and back or around the lake would, and additional parking could really provide a great experience to people. And it's an amazing spot. I think everybody knows that. One of the few places you can see that kind of view and get a sense of what the environment's like. And so I'm a fan of trying to concentrate that stuff as opposed to, you know, like we saw what happened up at Semaphore, right? You know, when you can't, and like 2 years ago, you know, they let the maximum number of people that could go into Garibaldi Park was half of the number of people that could go into Walmart in Squamish, like, which just seems bizarre. 30,000 hectares, and you can have just under 500 people in there. They're still limiting access at Chikai, at Rubble Creek, Diamond Head, and although they might be pulling back on the Diamond Head piece, and then yeah, so I think I would certainly advocating for an additional capacity in certain locations, and so let's take that opportunity to educate people. Let's take that opportunity to give people a really good experience. But let's also make sure that they're using the facilities. Like, right, this is FLNR did an assessment a couple of years ago. They determined that there was something in the neighborhood of 60,000 pounds of human feces that is scattered around the state. I do. This is an astounding number. It is an absolutely astounding number, and I would rather they use a urine diverting toilet than crap it in the river. You know, really.
Oh yeah.
So and I as much as I have all the time in the world for Tourism Pemberton to be building and installing and maintaining outhouses. It's not their job. It is the job of the Ministry of Forest and Land of Rec Sites and Trails, which is now part of the Ministry of the Environment. And you know, that the fact is that the provincial budget for BC Parks is in 40 million, give or take, on a $70 billion budget. It's a rounding error.
Mhm.
You know, the idea that we should go to $100 million a year for BC Parks, to me, it's a no-brainer. It's just, I don't understand why the government isn't doing it. I'll certainly be continuing to advocate for that. And Rec Sites and Trails budgets have been flat for the last couple of years as well, and those budgets need to significantly increase. And we also need to look at visitation. So the Sea to Sky is one of the, Sea to Sky, the Okanagan, and Southern Vancouver Island are the three places where they get the bulk of the visitation, and to some degree the Fraser Valley. So, you know, the visitation, we shouldn't be taking these resources and spreading them equally around the province. You know, they need to go where they can have the most impact on visitors, and certainly in the Sea to Sky, that's one of them. We were looking to get, I think we had a plan in 2015 to put 400 campsites, recreation campsites in the Squamish Valley. Since 2017, 0 have been built. So yet has visitation declined? No. So it's becoming a bit of a crisis, actually. And increasingly, I see government, I had a meeting with Flynn Road the other day. And again, nothing has been accomplished. There doesn't seem to be any intention to build anymore in the short term. And the initiative is going to be make people like just tell us send them somewhere else. And I think it's just completely naive. Childcare, how's that going with the new facilities? Going to start working this or start?
Going along there, yeah.
Good.
You know.
It'll be interesting to see what the provincial initiatives are around housing coming up for this spring. I doubt Pemberton will be one of those communities that's targeted. But interestingly, I know one of the people who is going to likely be one of the main drivers of the new department that is going to administer and coordinate with ensuring the municipalities actually produce what they or produce some housing on a timely basis at a reasonable cost. And once if that person takes the job, which I understand they've been offered, then you'll recognize the name for sure. But it'll be interesting to see what they actually do, what legislation comes forward, what tools they use. Hopefully it's not just a stick, but there's also some carrots to try and encourage timely processing. But as I said, I don't think Squamish or Pemberton are likely going to be either of them. But from what I understand, they are going to look at small communities, medium-sized communities, and large communities. So we won't be able to avoid it.
Is there any talk about also taking sticks and carrots, incentivizing the type of housing that's being built? Because I know that there's this wider conversation that's going on about how, you know, we need to increase our supply. I do remember reading a few things where the suggestion was also, well, yes, okay, we do have a supply issue. The other issue is that we're not building the type of housing that we need. And so, I mean, because that could be, you know, we could approve, 200 new homes, but if they're all, they end up selling for $2 million each, then that doesn't actually address the needs within the community. So I'm just wondering if, and again, I understand that that's very difficult because a lot of that is market driven, but just, is that part of the discussion that the provincial government is looking at, not even for municipalities, but within their own real, what will be there to incentivize that not only are we building more housing, but we're building the appropriate type of housing that we need.
Honestly, I don't know what they're going to do, but we certainly expect to see legislation within the next month or two that relative specifically to these issues. How are we going to incentivize housing? How are we going to make sure that it's the type of housing that we need? how do you manage costs? How do you manage market? Well, it's a multifaceted thing. We also, part of the function is access to labor, right? And that's a challenge around here, so. And then floodplains also create another issue for us here, so what do we feel about? But good questions, and we'll just keep an eye out as soon as we'll see what is presented over the course of the next little while. But they really have, certainly, the premier was the housing minister for 2 years. They were just talking on the radio this morning about I think the housing cost in Metro Vancouver is worse than it has ever been. It is more expensive than it has ever been, like relative to income. So this is one of the metrics that he's going to be judged by. And so we now have a housing ministry for the first time ever. And a minister in charge of it, and a parliamentary secretary to support him. So it'd be astounding if they didn't actually create some criteria and some initiatives. Obviously, grants are increasingly or continue to be important. One of the things I was going to talk to you guys about was that, as you know, the budget, we have a $6 billion surplus this year for a variety of different reasons. To some degree, the unexpected federal transfer, as well as many billions of dollars of contingencies which were not utilized, and so basically $6 billion burning a hole in their pocket. They're going, ooh, because the law is if you don't spend it, which is interestingly they don't actually have the money; it's a borrowed money. But if they don't spend it in this fiscal, then the law is that it has to go to pay down debt. So there's real enthusiasm to spend it. Now, just to put some context to things, in 2017, the provincial, when the NDP took power, the provincial debt, the global provincial debt was 65 billion, give or take. As of the end of this fiscal plan, so next year, it will be $128 billion. So essentially the provincial debt will have doubled since 2017. So I don't personally think that paying down a little bit of debt is necessarily a bad idea. Like just because you have the money, just because you have some room in your credit card doesn't mean you need to max it out. However, that said, it's inevitable that some of this surplus is going to get spent. Now, this surplus is spent, it has to be actioned by the end of the fiscal, which is March 31st. I don't see how they're going to possibly spend $6 billion in the next, month and a half or 2 months, but there'll be an attempt to do it. So there is there's what they call year-end funding. It's something that's been around forever. Governments always, you got, $100 million extra, but surplus, they'll try and spend it, and they'll try and give it away in ways that they'll be able to get some credit for. They try and spend it on things, and it's not just the NDP. When we were in power, we did the same thing. You have a little bit of money, it spend some year-end money, doing this or doing that. And so all to say that I think you might want to think about that. And if you have any projects that can be actioned relatively quickly, that they don't have to be necessarily complete by March 31st, but they have to be the contracts led and that sort of thing by that time.
This March 31st.
Yeah. So sort of off the shelf stuff, or be it community groups, be it the muni, nothing that creates an ongoing, like you're not going to get funding for a staff member that ultimately ends up having to be funded later. It's just sort of one-off year-end, typically capital projects, but think about that. And if you have anything, then shoot it off to the minister who's responsible. And with a little pitch about the great program. They do it really quickly. It'll have a tremendous impact on the community, on the environment, on, you know, whatever you want to put together. And CC me so I can support you. Now there's no, because if I don't know what you want, then it's pretty hard to be supportive. Unless I'm imagining it. What's I going to say that it's commonly felt, well, they're just going to spend it on government held ridings, but they can't. There's just no way they can spend it all on government held ridings. Some of it's going to come here. So it might as well be the community's priorities as opposed to government's priorities, and so make some suggestions.
So right now we're looking at potential shortfalls, and we're already working with provincial reps on the shortfall for the daycare. Because costs have gone up and all that other things since we started the process. There is consideration, they're getting it from other parts, from other applicants, other successful applicants, that the funds provided are no longer enough. So they're looking at it, but that might be somewhere we would look for more funds. And if I'm looking a little beyond the usual things, I mean, you know, things like our boardwalk replacement on 1 mile is something that we want to do. That's got to, you know, I don't know if that fits in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Trail work on, you know, I see that the Sea Sky Community Services Food Bank got $100,000 or $150,000 or something. That was not planned. That was one of those pieces. I'm pretty sure. So.
Okay.
So can we check in with you as to which minister we would go?
Yeah, happy to provide you with direction. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Then I mentioned briefly the Sea to Sky facilities, the VCH Sea to Sky facilities master plan that had been in the books for 2019. Then of course COVID came along, so God knows couldn't do anything else. So that never happened. Then it got pushed out to 2021, and then it got theoretically a contract was let last fall. Although talking to VCH doesn't tell me anything's actually happened.
Does that stand
for? Vancouver Coastal Health.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and the issue is that the facilities, the infrastructure, the healthcare infrastructure in the corridor is, with the exception of the Whistler Clinic, is getting old, and it's not necessarily reflecting the population growth that we've seen. And would be it acute care or long-term care. Certainly, there's only one way to get into Hilltop House, and that's if somebody else dies. And if nobody dies for a month or two and you need to have long-term care, you're going to end up in Surrey or something. So given the demographic as it slowly changes here, we need that. We need additional some upgrades in Squamish Hospital. There's no question about that. Same with Whistler in terms of primary care networks. And then this building over here is, well, if we get a flood of record, there's going to be about 3 feet of water in that place. So, it needs to be replaced. It's probably the oldest facility in the whole corridor. It needs to be replaced and needs to be expanded. And there also needs to be consideration for primary care physicians, because that's the biggest problem. Now, granted, they all got a gigantic raise, and they've got some additional funds coming for administrative costs. Nonetheless, to have them all run as little businesses here and there and everywhere without necessarily a centralized support system just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think, in my view anyway, I think that needs to be considered in terms of how primary care physicians are housed and how the business works. So I think we should all, through the healthcare or not the foundations, but through the hospital districts, through local government, to keep the pressure on VCH to actually get this thing done. Like, you know, there's no real good excuse for why we're 4 years later and we haven't made any progress on it. And especially given the population growth that we're seeing here, it's past time.
The hospital district board, we have a budget meeting tomorrow, but for the last however many months, we have made the statement to BCH that we will no longer be funding any of their requests until that master plan is done. So you know how every year they come and go, well, can you help us fix our bathroom and can you put in a new refrigeration or a new tank, oxygen tank farm, da, da, da. We've said no, 100% no to any of it. We're gonna put it in reserve. We're gonna fund local priorities and we're not gonna look at a VCH request for funding until that master plan is done.
Yeah, well, you know, they have been challenging to deal with forever and.
I think we got the definition, but I totally get it. And the other part of it too is that the model still drives everybody down the Lionsgate and all there, but we need first level care. You know, we need to build up the Squamish Hospital. We need to look at our clinic instead of just funding Lionsgate priorities and trying to send all our residents down there, which is not effective. So,
No, well, fortunately, we're not having to fund Lionsgate though.
yeah,
One small.
yes.
Yeah, I think that was it for my list.
Awesome. Any last thoughts, comments? A little over time, but that was really good.
Appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
No, didn't have to come far.
Do it again
Yeah,
and regular updates.
yeah, absolutely. Maybe we come back after, like sometime in, you know, May or something, just we can talk about budget. Talking about budget estimates. Also, if there's things that you want to better understand, be it FLNRL, be it you know, be it health, whatever. Think about the budget estimate process. It really starts in April, and April, May are the 2 months. And I don't have it's hard to know how much time I get allocated. And I don't imagine you have many BC Ferries questions, but you know, there's an opportunity for local issues. And I certainly Squamish has a list of issues for MOTI. And I think that, you know, the ones that you're talking about, well, I believe you me, there'll be a little bit of pressure from me on that stupid little bridge. If we see.
Supposedly it's happening this spring, but they said that last year. Exactly.
The inside.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And line painting and road sweeping and cycling signage. That's one of the pieces I'm thinking about putting forward is a piece of legislation to talk about to enforce or to put some legal parameters around safe passing,
Mhm.
you know, for cyclists. So it's one of the few provinces that doesn't have that legislation. Because I think most places like 1.5 meters, you can't get closer than that to a cyclist. So, but you know, having those shoulders paved would be nice too.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
July.
Right. I'm just remembering the weather when I pulled out.
Pardon me?
Keep employing my children.
Oh, is that right? What are you expecting the farm?
Both Sophie.
Oh,
does.
excellent.
I love it.